me the pleasure of showing him round Paynton Zoo and seeing this outstanding, amazing tourism attraction in Torbay, one of many across the west of England, who are sadly being massively impacted by this jobs tax.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's very... Well, look, may I start by wishing Jenny, his guide dog, a very happy birthday, I think, for yesterday. 6 years old, although she doesn't look particularly interested in my answer, I have to say. Mr. Speaker, look, I do recognise the importance of tourism to his beautiful constituency. I've been there many times, worked there for a short time, driving growth and creating jobs. We've announced a new Visitor Economy Advisory Council, which will work with business to deliver a new strategy focused on supporting growth and the tourism industry. Visit Britain has also launched a new international marketing campaign to showcase Britain's incredible heritage, culture and landscapes. And I know the Minister of Tourism would be happy to keep him updated.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme hasn't been uprated with inflation since 2012, meaning compensation for victims of violent crime, including rape and child abuse, is worth less than half what it was then in real terms. The consultation response published before Easter said there wasn't the money to look at changing the scope, tariffs or time limits, despite expert advice and the recommendations of the ICSA review. So will the Prime Minister commit to properly funding the Ministry of Justice to do this vital reform work so victims and their needs can become a priority instead of an afterthought?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable friend knows my personal commitment to delivering justice for victims of crime who've been completely failed over the last 14 years. We are improving access to compensation through better online systems and equipping staff with the skills they need to better support victims. We are, of course, also consulting on a revised Victims Code that will increase the powers of the Victims Commissioner to ensure more accountability. And I'm happy to ensure that she meets the relevant minister to discuss those issues.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, can I also wish everyone a happy St. George's Day? Yes. And can I also associate myself with remarks about the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis on Easter Monday? Being married to a Catholic, I know the profound loss for millions in Britain and across the world. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister now accept that when he said that it was the law that trans women were women, he was wrong?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I welcome the Supreme Court ruling on this issue. It brings clarity and it will give confidence to women and, of course, to service providers. The Equality and Human Rights Commission will now issue updated guidance, and it's important that that happens and that all service providers then act accordingly. This government's approach and my approach has been as follows: to support and implement the Supreme Court ruling, and we will; to continue to protect single-sex spaces based on biological sex, and we will; but also to ensure that trans people are treated with respect, and we will; and to ensure that everybody is given dignity in their everyday lives. I do think this is the time now to lower the temperature, to move forward and to conduct this debate with the care and compassion that it deserves. And I think that should unite the whole House.
Mr. Speaker, he can't bring himself to admit that he was wrong. That was the question. But he spoke about respect and dignity and compassion and lowering the temperature. So will he now apologise to the member for Canterbury, the very brave member for Canterbury, for hounding her out of the Labour Party simply for telling the truth?
Mr. Speaker, I've always approached this on the basis that we should treat everyone with dignity and respect, whatever their different views, and I'll continue to do so. And I'll tell you, Mr. Speaker, for why. Because when we lose sight of that approach and make this a political football, as happened in the past, then we end up with the spectacle of a decent man, and he was a decent man, the previous Prime Minister, diminishing himself at this dispatch box by making trans jokes whilst the mother of a murdered trans teenager watched from the public gallery just up there. That will never be my approach. My approach will be to support the ruling, to protect single-sex spaces and treat everybody with dignity and respect. And I believe there's a consensus in this House and the country for that approach.
Mr. Speaker, there was no apology for the member for Canterbury. There is no taking of responsibility. He talks about political football. He practically kicked her out of his party. Constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal. He talks about my predecessor. What about the abuse I faced from his MPs calling me a transphobe for supporting what the Supreme Court has now clarified in his words? And where was he? He hid for 6 days without commenting on the Supreme Court judgment. Why did it take him so long to respond? Isn't it because he was scared?
Yes. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the only fiction here is the idea she delivered anything in office. She held the post of Minister for Women and Equalities for 2 years, and she did precisely nothing. She provided no clarity on the law, did nothing to improve women's lives, which got materially worse under her watch. They talk, for example, about hospitals and mixed-sex wards, uphill and down. What happened in the last decade? The use of mixed-sex wards in our NHS rose by 2,000%. And there's a pattern of behaviour here. Women and Equalities Minister failed to do anything for women. The Trade Minister, who failed to get a trade deal with the US. The Business Minister, who failed to get a deal with British Steel. She's a spectator, not a leader.
Mr. Speaker, I will tell him what I did. I stopped the gender. I will. Yes. Yes. When his Labour leader in Scotland was whipping his MSPs to get male rapists into women's prisons, I stopped that gender recognition bill. I helped commission the Cass review. I replaced the guidance on single-sex toilets. I made sure that the puberty blockers issue was resolved while he was sitting there cheering on the ideology that was taking away safe spaces. And when the Prime Minister stayed silent last week, presumably waiting for what Morgan McSweeney thinks, on his WhatsApp groups, some of his closest ministers were plotting to overturn the Supreme Court decision. Labour MP after Labour MP stood up yesterday and challenged the ruling. How can we take his government seriously on this?
Well, I think the WhatsApp group she should be worried about is the one of his shadow Justice Secretary. And Mr. Speaker, the mask has slipped just 1 week before the elections because the Shadow Justice Secretary is not here, a man who's doing everything he can to replace her. The man that most of them want as leader of their party has admitted that Reform and the Tories are working together. He said, I want this fight to be united. He said he's determined to bring this coalition, he calls it, together one way or another. Well, I think we know what that means. Every Tory voter is appalled at the thought of paying for the NHS. Every Reform voter who hates what the Tories did the last 14 years, they're not Conservatives, they're a con.
Who's playing political football now? He's got no answers, Mr. Speaker. He's got no answers. Yesterday, Labour MP after Labour MP challenged the ruling. He should be more worried about his backbenchers than my frontbenchers. His Labour ministers called the chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission appalling. Baroness Faulkner's role is critical to enforcing the court's judgment. She has had to put up with relentless abuse, not just from his front bench, but from activists and ideologues. Reappointing her will be a clear sign that he is taking this issue seriously. So will he commit to reappointing Baroness Faulkner when her term expires this year?
I've always said the debate should be conducted properly on the principles of debate. I've said it many, many times. But I would remind the Leader of the Opposition that when they were in government, violence against women and girls reached record highs, rape prosecutions fell to record lows, and millions of women were left stuck on NHS waiting lists, unable to get the healthcare that they needed. Under this Labour government, NHS waiting lists down by more than 200,000. Domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms. We strengthen access to maternity pay, something she calls excessive. She talks about political footballs, but a coalition between Reform and the Tories being formed behind her back. We know what that means when the Shadow Justice Secretary and the member for Clacton cook up their joint manifesto. NHS charging a pro-Russia foreign policy, enter workers' rights. Just as the Love government lost control of the economy, the borders and health, in 6 short months, she's lost control of her party.
Mr. Speaker, he's clearly so uncomfortable talking about this subject. Yes. This is a choice between a Conservative Party that stood up for common sense and a Labour Party that bent the knee to every passing fad. Yeah. This is a question about moral courage, Mr. Speaker, about doing the right thing, even when it is difficult. And the truth is, he doesn't have the balls. Yeah. The Prime Minister only tells people what they want to hear. He only tells people what they want to hear. He is a weather vane who twists in the wind. He cheered an ideology that denied safe spaces to women and girls because he thought it was cool to do so. He hounded a brave female MP out of his party for telling the truth he accepts now. And now he is hiding behind the Supreme Court judgment. And isn't that because he doesn't know what he actually believes?
I can only assume that sounded better when she did it in the mirror earlier on. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter what the Leader of the Opposition says, because nobody believes, none of them, that she's going to lead them into the next election anyway. It's going to be the Shadow Justice Secretary. He's away plotting. That's why he's not here today, Mr. Speaker. And the member for Clacton fighting over the bones of the Tory party. And they think Reform are going to give them their votes without changing their policy. Absolutely no way. The member for Clacton's going to do what he always does, eat the Tory party for breakfast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I wish you and the House a happy St George's Day as well. I recently had the pleasure to visit the National Gas Operations in Peterborough, where the company was announcing a £350 million investment in the UK, including 100 new jobs at least in my constituency. This investment will make Peterborough the centre of the nation's core gas and hydrogen network. But one of the big challenges that infrastructure projects like this face is the lack of available skills and training for young people. So can I ask the Prime Minister what more he can do to boost apprenticeships in places like mine and ensure we create the opportunities this country so desperately needs?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? The net zero transition is a huge economic opportunity for this country, despite the naysayers on the opposition benches. And we've had almost £44 billion of investment since July, and that will deliver jobs across the country, including in his constituency. Investment, presumably, they don't want. We're ensuring we've got skilled workers that we need, launching the Skills England and our new growth and skills offer to encourage even more apprenticeships, and supporting industry-led plan for hydrogen to deliver the workforce needed for the industry of the future.
Shred David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I also wish the House and the country a happy St George's Day? And can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the late Pope Francis? As a Christian myself, I found his compassion absolutely inspiring, and my prayers are with Catholics in the UK and across the world who will feel his loss particularly deeply. Mr. Speaker, I raised with the Prime Minister before the issue of North Devon District Hospital. The last government promised to rebuild it, as they did hospitals across the southwest in places like Torbay and Musgrove Park. Unfortunately, they broke that promise, leaving appalling conditions like sewage leaks and patients being treated in corridors. So will the Prime Minister reconsider his decision to further delay the construction of new hospitals and ask his MPs to vote for our motion today for new hospitals?
Mr. Speaker, the previous programme, the party opposite, was undeliverable and unaffordable, as I think he knows and accepts. we put the new hospital programme on a sustainable footing with a timeline that can be met. We're not prepared to trade on false promises as they did. And obviously we put record investment into the NHS. But I do just gently urge him to one day get a bit more serious about the funding of these measures, because every week he comes here to basically push me on two issues: to spend a lot more money, but at the same time in the next breath opposing the measures in the budget to raise the money that's necessary.
Sir Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Prime Minister, we had a funded programme at the election. And I'm disappointed with his reply, and I hope he'll actually visit some of these hospitals to see the urgent need for rebuilding. Mr. Speaker, at Merton Mead Farm in Oxfordshire last week, I saw world-class British beef farmers at work. Farmers want him to be careful in any trade deal with President Trump. They were let down by the Conservatives' appalling trade deals and worried that a bad US deal could see American agribusiness undercut them with inferior meat. So will the Prime Minister guarantee a vote in this House on any trade deal that he agrees with the United States?
Yeah. Well, he raises a really important point of real interest and importance to farmers. We will negotiate, as he would expect, in the national interest and uphold the highest animal welfare standards. We are making progress on that, and then there'll be a process if a deal is reached.
Catherine Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time last year, train manufacturing at Alstom in Derby was grinding to a halt. On a single day, workers with a combined welding experience of nearly 1,000 years walked out of its doors. But the whole city came together with crucial backing from this Prime Minister. And what a difference a year makes, with Alstom saved and set to host the greatest gathering to celebrate 200 years of rail, and our railways coming back into public ownership with the headquarters of Great British Railways in Derby. Will the Prime Minister agree that with Labour, we are back on track?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, she's a fantastic champion for Derby. She's right, whether it's the workforce I met at Alstom or the workers at Hitachi in County Durham, we will support our rail industry, providing certainty that delivers jobs, investment and security for them. I met these workforces. I know how worried they were a year ago, she rightly says, when this government was in charge. I'm really proud that Derby will be the home of Great British Railways, because we're bringing railways back into public ownership, delivering better services for passengers, cutting delays and cancellations and boosting growth across the country.
Robin Swall.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister and my party in regards to the condolences to the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is often referred to his time working in Northern Ireland, and I've spoken to one of his bosses who speaks of his diligence. I wonder in that vein, could he speak to his Northern Ireland team about their understanding of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement? Because the Secretary of State in an interview seemed to think that it had been negotiated by Ian Paisley rather than David Trimble and my party. His Northern Ireland Minister has said at the start of this week that the future of Northern Ireland as part of the Union is dependent on opinion polls, and she wasn't sure if she was a unionist. Can the Prime Minister confirm to me his understanding of the principle of consent and confirm to this House that he is a unionist?
Well, I thank him for that question, and I did work in Northern Ireland for 5 years and therefore appreciate firsthand how important these issues are. And it was a very formative period for me in terms of my career and my thinking. The Good Friday Agreement is one of the proudest achievements of the last Labour government. I pay tribute to everybody who helped bring that around, because as he will know and other members will know, it was such an important moment in the history of the conflict. And I absolutely stand full square behind the principles, some of which I was doing my part to help implement when I was working in Northern Ireland. They will always drive me on the issues that he raises with me.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you. Happy St George's Day, Mr Speaker, and may I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about Pope Francis. Mr Speaker, after 14 years of Conservative government, too many of my Middlesbrough and Thornbury East constituents live on low incomes or in real poverty. I very much welcome the employment support proposals in the Welfare Green Paper, but the government has to be clear about the real opportunities it's offering more than 3 million families who it says will lose out financially as a result of this package. So before asking MPs to vote, can he confirm that we will see fresh OBR analysis, evidence on who will be affected by the PIP changes, and the government's own assessment of the employment impact of its measures? And will he confirm that this policy will not result in increased experience of poverty?
Well, Mr Speaker, we are reforming a broken system, the system that we inherited, and I think most people accept that it needs reform because it traps people in unemployment and inactivity, and we need to reform it for that reason. The principles will be that we will provide support where support is needed. Where people do want to get into work, we will help them into work. The current system operates against people getting into work who want to make that transition, and that if you can work, you should work. Moving into work is what halves your risk of being in poverty, and that's why we've invested £1 billion in tailored employment support. And of course, we're introducing a new premium for those with the most severe lifelong disabilities who will never be able to work.
Last week, former steelworkers in Port Talbot watched in dismay as this government deemed their livelihoods worth less than those in Scunthorpe. FOIs reveal that the UK government doesn't know how its funding for reskilling workers in Wales is being used, or even how many people are being retrained. We know concerns have been raised by the Transition Board. If this government can't explain how it's helping Port Talbot's laid-off workers to build a future through reskilling, why shouldn't those workers then come to the logical conclusion that Labour has abandoned them?
She raised a really important issue in relation to Port Talbot. I visited a number of times and heard firsthand from the workforce there. And she may or may not know that even in opposition before the election, I was talking to the owners to try to persuade them to delay their decisions because I knew an election was coming. That's how important I thought it was. I would remind her that at the same time, the then Prime Minister refused to pick up a call to the First Minister to even discuss the issue. I took a different approach because I realised just how important it was. I would remind her, because she compares it with the decision we took last week, that the blast furnaces were turned off in January of last year, the coke ovens in March 2024, and therefore that was before the election. That was the very thing I was trying to ensure didn't happen for reasons that she and the workforce will understand, and I was talking to the workforce throughout that. What we've been able to do there since then is to negotiate an improved deal with Tata. We did that within 10 weeks, better terms for the workers. We're working hard to maximise opportunities from the £1.25 billion investment in electric arc furnace, and supporting those with job losses with £80 million of funding to learn new skills, supply chains, and protect communities. But I mean, she talks about protecting working people, but she voted against the biggest settlement, devolution settlement, since devolution. That includes more money for public services, including the NHS, and they voted against it.
Can I commend the Prime Minister and his government for the action taken so far to reform the NHS in England, making it fit for the modern day with improved technology, more GPs and appointments, and waiting lists cut for consecutive months. However, it is deeply unfortunate that in Scotland we have an SNP government that has made the political choice to waste taxpayers' money on vanity projects, flawed legislation and failed court cases rather than focus on improving our health service? Does he agree with me that the people of Airdrie and Shotts, who have been promised a new hospital for almost a decade, deserve far better than suffering and pain on waiting lists and receiving treatment in crumbling buildings as a direct consequence of SNP incompetence?
My honourable friend is a real champion for Airdrie and Shotts. And over 60,000 Scots have been stuck waiting for tests or treatments for over a year. That's a 46% rise in 1 year. And yet almost 50,000 fewer operations have been carried out compared with before the pandemic. And compare what the SNP are doing with what we're doing here in England. We've driven down waiting lists within 6 months, 6 months worth of reductions in a row with over 3 million extra appointments. Scotland's NHS urgently needs change, but the SNP has no strategy, no plan, and absolutely no ideas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The danger posed by China to our national security is self-evident. So can the Prime Minister explain why he and his government have chosen to treat Beijing as a business partner and not as the hostile state that it truly is?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've set out our approach to China a number of times. It's not materially different to the approach of the last government, of the last years of the last government, I might just add. And in relation to Scunthorpe, of course, the deal that we had to deal with during recess was the deal negotiated by the last government. We've taken sensible decisions in the national interest and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the Prime Minister will join me in celebrating the opening of the new Brixton Blood Donation Centre in my constituency, which in 3 months has seen over 3,700 people donate, over 1,000 of them first-timers and 10% of them black. However, with sickle cell anemia, the fastest growing genetic condition in the UK, this is not enough. Demand for the RO blood subtype, more common in people of African descent, is rising 10 to 15% annually and is crucial for treating sickle cell. Rules around travel as well as inaccurate iron tests are seeing willing black donors turned away for 4 to 12 months. Of course, blood donation must be safe, but failure to review these guidelines is costing lives. So will the Prime Minister commit to reviewing these rules and join me in calling on you, Mr. Speaker, to help us all play our part by facilitating a biannual blood drive in Parliament?
Well, I'll leave that to you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's for me to suggest that you donate your blood. Well, I'm sure you do, and we can support this jointly. And actually, across the House, we should take that up under your leadership, Mr. Speaker. But let me join her in welcoming the new Brixton Blood Donor Centre and the life-saving support that it provides. Increasing donor diversity is a priority for the NHS, and we're working to increase raw blood donations by engaging with communities who are more likely to have this blood type. And I'll make sure that she meets the relevant health minister to discuss what more we can do in this area.
Sir David Dennis.
British governments of all political persuasions have long taken pride in reducing the carbon footprint of British manufacturing industry. Unfortunately, in too many cases, and too much of it, of this so-called reduction has been achieved by driving British industry abroad to other countries, like China and India, that actually use more carbon to produce the same product. British steel is just the latest of this, which is bad for the global environment and also disastrous for the British economy. And this is against a background of European carbon policies that have failed over 20 years. So does the Prime Minister have a new domestic British policy which will protect British industry from this long-term disastrous trend?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are doing everything available to us to protect car building in this country, and he will have noticed that 2 weeks ago I made announcements about the Z mandate and what more we could do to support the industry at the moment. That was an immediate response to circumstances as they were, but I indicated at the time, and I do so again, that we will do whatever it takes to support our car industry.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent Billy spent months trying to see a GP to investigate his symptoms. It took 4 months of telephone appointments before we finally got seen in person and actually got the tests that diagnosed stage 4 cancer. A delay in diagnosis which has dramatically changed his prognosis. And as a friend, as someone who's become a friend, it hurts me to see the pain he is now living in. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that primary care is a vital part of the healthcare system and we need wider access to both in-person appointments and to telephone ones?
Well, I'm deeply sorry to hear about Billy's case, and I'm sure the whole House is. And our focus has to be on making sure GPs spend more time caring for patients. And that includes the investment of an additional £889 million into general practice in England, putting over 1,500 GPs into surgeries since October. We did deliver a record settlement for Scotland's public services to help fix our NHS and ensure people like Billy get the care that they deserve.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through the ages, an innovative and vibrant City of London has underpinned investment and growth in the wider economy. But the main challenge the city currently faces is how to get more capital into capital markets. Now, I believe, and many believe, that London can gain new momentum if the government takes bold action to challenge and empower those who steward our pension assets to do things in new ways. So I ask the Prime Minister, following the decision of the Chancellor to offer continuity of leadership at the FCA, will he convene an urgent number 10 summit with city leaders and the regulators to reset and to maximise the chances that the city can lead economic growth and recovery in these times of grave uncertainty and turmoil?
Well, he's right that we need to go further and faster in terms of kickstarting growth, attracting the investment we need to create jobs, and our regulators must regulate for growth and not just for risk. And we do want that continuity of leadership that he mentions, and we are convening and getting people together to drive that growth, and we'll take away the ideas that he puts on the table.
Listen to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Proposed changes to personal independence payments mean that people who require various levels of support due to lifelong conditions such as learning disabilities will not meet the new eligibility criteria. However, the Green Paper introduces a group of people with lifelong conditions who will not be subject to reassessment. Can the Prime Minister confirm that people with a learning disability, which is a lifelong condition that will not change, will be included in the group of claimants who will not be subjected to repeated reassessments?
Well, thank her for her question. I know this means a lot to her. We're clear on the principles for reform, protecting those with the most severe disabilities who will never be able to work, as she references, and making sure people with the most severe disabilities and health conditions will never face the prospect of being constantly reassessed again. We are making sure that extra financial support is based on the impact of health condition or disability, not the capacity to work, and I can reassure her we're carefully considering options for transitional protection.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His Chancellor's economic policies started off badly and have headed rapidly downhill from there. His Energy Secretary's policies ensure that energy-rich Scotland lives under the highest domestic and commercial energy prices in the world, and his Foreign Secretary provides diplomatic cover for the atrocities committed in Gaza by the IDF, to the horror of the people of Scotland. This is just one, but he is the incompetent in chief who refuses to bring his ministers into line. Just one of the reasons that independence enjoys an 11-point lead over remaining in this dysfunctional, broken Brexit Britain. Does he understand why the people of Scotland are so dissatisfied with the latest iteration of dysfunctional British rule in Scotland?
Does he understand the electorate in Scotland answered that question in July of last year? I remember there used to be quite a few of them sitting around here. Now it's a distant cry from up there.
Final questions are a sultan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, humanitarian law organisations applied for an arrest warrant for Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar over alleged war crimes in Gaza, including the siege of Kamal Adwan Hospital and the torture of its director, Dr. Hussam Abu Safir. Yet the red carpet was rolled out. Saar has justified blocking vital humanitarian aid into Gaza, backed the illegal annexation of Palestinian land, and rejected a Palestinian state. The Prime Minister is a human rights lawyer, so surely he knows that the UK has a legal duty to uphold international law. Why then did he block the arrest of an unindicted war criminal?
I didn't.
Right, that completes Prime Minister's question.
Thank you.